Ethan Caldwell, 38 years old, Senior Operations Director for 11 years. Mr. Caldwell. The voice came from somewhere behind the rows of polished oak chairs. I turned slowly. A grey-haired man wearing a navy suit stood in the doorway of the executive conference room, holding a thin leather folder against his chest. Two security officers stepped aside the moment they recognized him. Every conversation inside the room faded into silence. He looked directly at me. May I ask why the majority shareholder of this company is standing outside, instead of sitting at the head of today's board meeting? No one answered. Not my former boss. Not the executives. Not the people who had applauded, while I walked away less than 24 hours earlier, carrying nothing except a cardboard box. The silence lasted only a few seconds. It felt like years. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. For most of my life, I believed that if I worked harder than everyone else, recognition would eventually arrive on its own. My father used to tell me that respect was like planting an oak tree. You don't see much for years, he would say while trimming the old maple behind our tiny Ohio house. But if the roots are healthy, one day people will sit under the shade without realizing who planted it. I believed him. Looking back now, I realize he wasn't just talking about trees. He was talking about people. I grew up in a neighborhood where almost every family worked with their hands. Mechanics, welders, postal workers, electricians. My father repaired industrial machines for 32 years. My mother taught mathematics at a public middle school for 26 years. We never had much money. When I was 9 years old, our washing machine stopped working. Instead of buying another one, my father spent 2 weekends rebuilding the motor using parts from 3 broken machines he found in a junkyard. It still washes clothes, he smiled. It just has a longer story. That sentence stayed with me. Everything valuable had a longer story. At school, I wasn't the loudest student. I wasn't captain of the football team. I wasn't class president. I simply kept showing up. In 10th grade, I finished second in the state mathematics competition by only 4 points. In my senior year, I graduated with a 3.96 GPA. I worked 23 hours every week stocking shelves at a grocery store while taking advanced placement classes. No one applauded. No one noticed. And honestly, that was fine, because I had already learned something my classmates hadn't. Most important work happens when nobody is watching. When I earned a scholarship to Northwestern University, my relatives acted as though it were luck. My Uncle Richard laughed during Thanksgiving dinner. Engineering. He shook his head. You'll spend your life fixing printers. Everyone laughed. I smiled too. Not because it was funny. Because arguing never changed anyone's opinion. Results did. College wasn't glamorous. I graduated with only $1,200 in my checking account. My first apartment measured 480 square feet. The refrigerator made strange clicking sounds every night. The heating worked only if I hit the thermostat twice. I drove a 13-year-old Honda Accord with 218,000 miles. But I had something I valued far more. Opportunity. At 24, I joined Harrison Industrial Systems as a junior process analyst. Annual salary: $48,000. The company employed nearly 2,000 people across 6 states. I promised myself one thing on the first day. Every job they gave me, I would leave it better than I found it. Nobody asked me to stay late. I stayed anyway. Nobody required detailed reports. I wrote them anyway. Nobody expected me to mentor interns. I did it anyway. After 18 months, one production facility reduced operating waste by 14% using a workflow I designed. My manager received an award. He thanked the entire department. He never mentioned my name. People asked whether that bothered me. It didn't. Recognition delayed is not recognition denied. At least, that's what I believed then. By my 5th year, I had helped streamline logistics across 9 distribution centers. Annual savings exceeded $12 million. The executive presentation carried someone else's signature. Again, I noticed a pattern. The higher people climbed, the more invisible the people below them became. Still, I kept working. Not because I enjoyed being overlooked. Because I believed companies eventually recognize consistency. That belief carried me through promotions. Process manager, regional operations manager, vice president of operations. Finally, senior operations director. 11 years. 326 employees reporting through my organization. Average employee retention improved from 68% to 91%. Production delays decreased 42%. Customer satisfaction reached the highest score in company history. Revenue nearly doubled during my division's leadership. Every number could be verified. Every improvement documented. Every success measurable. But success inside a company doesn't always depend on measurable things. Sometimes, it depends on who tells the story. And that brings me to Daniel Mercer. 54 years old. Chief Executive Officer. Confident. Brilliant with investors. Exceptional public speaker. The kind of executive who could make ordinary quarterly earnings sound like a historic achievement. People admired him. I did too. At first, Daniel possessed a remarkable ability to make everyone feel included during conversations. He remembered birthdays, children's names, favorite sports teams. He could walk through a factory once and greet employees by name 6 months later. That talent made people trust him, including me. But over time, I noticed another pattern. Every successful project slowly became his vision. Every difficult decision quietly became someone else's responsibility. He rarely lied. He simply rearranged ownership of ideas. It was subtle, almost elegant. If a project succeeded, he had guided it. If it struggled, the team needed improvement. Most employees never questioned it. Because confidence is persuasive, especially when accompanied by expensive suits and polished speeches. Daniel wasn't cruel. That's what made him complicated. He sincerely believed the company existed because of leadership, not because of thousands of ordinary employees. In his mind, vision created results. Execution merely followed. It was a philosophy, not malice. And philosophies are harder to argue against than personalities. Our biggest disagreements never happened in conference rooms. They happened quietly. He once removed safety upgrades from a manufacturing budget because investors expected stronger quarterly profits. I spent 3 weeks gathering incident reports, repair estimates, insurance projections. Eventually, he restored the budget. Not because I convinced him emotionally. Because the numbers proved prevention cost less than accidents. He smiled afterward. You're stubborn, Ethan. I prefer prepared. He laughed. Same thing. For a while, we respected each other. Or so I thought. Then Harrison Industrial Systems attracted acquisition interest. 3 investment firms requested confidential financial reviews. Rumors spread through every office. People whispered near coffee machines. Managers closed conference room doors. Employees refreshed financial news websites every afternoon. Nobody knew what would happen. But everyone sensed something approaching. Daniel became different. Meetings grew shorter. He spent more time traveling. Outside consultants appeared almost weekly. Entire departments received requests for historical operating data dating back 8 years. I personally prepared 74 detailed reports. Production forecasts, efficiency models, capital investment projections, employee retention studies, risk assessments, thousands of pages. Daniel thanked me exactly once. Then he presented those materials to investors as evidence of executive leadership. Again, I said nothing, because results mattered more than recognition. Or at least, I still believed they did. Meanwhile, the company buzzed with rumors. Some employees were convinced we would be acquired by a multinational corporation before the end of the quarter. Others believed Daniel was preparing for an initial public offering. A few insisted nothing was happening at all. The truth was that none of us knew. Every confidential meeting created 3 new theories. Every executive trip became office gossip. Even the cafeteria conversations changed. Instead of discussing weekend plans, people debated who would survive if ownership changed. I stayed out of those conversations. Not because I wasn't curious. Because speculation had never solved a single operational problem. There was always another report to review. Another plant to visit. Another manager who needed guidance. That had become my routine. Monday in Chicago. Wednesday in Indianapolis. Friday in Columbus. Nearly 130 flights over 4 years. More hotel breakfasts than family breakfasts. More airport lounges than birthday parties. When people looked at my salary, they imagined comfort. They never counted what the job quietly collected in return. My wife Emily understood that better than anyone. We met when we were both 26. She worked as an architect. Calm, patient, the kind of person who never interrupted, because she believed people revealed themselves if you simply listened long enough. One evening, after I returned home from another 3-day trip, she placed a mug of coffee on the kitchen table. "You look tired. I'll catch up this weekend. You've been saying that for 6 months. I smiled. Just one more acquisition review. She looked at me for a long moment. Ethan, promise me something. What? If this company ever forgets your value, don't forget it yourself. I laughed softly. They won't. She didn't answer. Sometimes the people who love us notice the cracks before we do. Looking back, that conversation happened almost a year before everything fell apart. Around the same time, another executive entered the picture. Claire Donovan, 46 years old. Chief Financial Officer. Unlike Daniel, Claire never tried to dominate a room. She listened far more than she spoke. During meetings, she filled yellow legal pads with handwritten notes. Most people assumed she was quiet because she lacked confidence. They couldn't have been more wrong. Claire simply understood that information arrives faster when people believe you're only listening. Over the years, we developed mutual respect. Whenever operations needed additional investment, she asked difficult questions. Not to reject proposals. To understand them completely. She once spent 4 hours reviewing a warehouse automation project with me. At the end, she closed the folder. "I have one final question." "Go ahead. If we approve this, who deserves the credit?" I shrugged. "The team." She smiled. "I hoped you'd say that." At the time, I didn't understand why she asked. Months later, I would. Then there was Michael Reeves. 42. Vice President of Sales. Charismatic. Funny. Always perfectly dressed. Michael believed perception created reality. He could sell almost anything. Including himself. He wasn't dishonest. He simply loved being associated with success. Whenever operations exceeded delivery targets, Michael praised the sales team's customer relationships. Whenever deliveries slipped because demand unexpectedly doubled, he reminded everyone operations needed to improve. He and Daniel understood each other perfectly. Neither considered themselves selfish. They simply viewed the business through different lenses. Daniel believed leadership deserved recognition. Michael believed visibility deserved recognition. I believed work deserved recognition. 3 philosophies. 1 executive team. For years they somehow coexisted. Until the acquisition talks intensified. The atmosphere inside headquarters changed almost overnight. Consultants occupied entire conference rooms. Legal teams appeared with rolling suitcases full of documents. Financial analysts requested information at all hours. One Tuesday evening I was still reviewing inventory reports at 8:40 p.m. when my assistant, Lisa, knocked gently on my office door. "Ethan, come in." She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say this." "Then don't." "No." She lowered her voice. "I think you should know." I set my glasses on the desk. "What happened?" "I accidentally delivered board packets to conference room 7. And Daniel told the consultants that operations could easily function without senior leadership changes. I frowned. "I'm not following." "He specifically mentioned your position." The room became very quiet. "What exactly did he say?" Lisa swallowed. "He said, operational excellence isn't tied to one individual. Ethan has done good work, but anyone with solid management experience could step into that role within 90 days. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I'm sorry." I leaned back in my chair. For several seconds I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. Because I was thinking. Could someone replace me? Of course. Every position can eventually be filled. I had trained dozens of managers precisely because no organization should depend on one person. So Daniel wasn't entirely wrong. But something about the timing bothered me. For years he had praised my leadership privately. Now, during acquisition negotiations, I had suddenly become replaceable. Words reveal priorities. Timing reveals intentions. I thanked Lisa for telling me. Then I finished reviewing inventory reports until nearly midnight. The next morning I acted exactly as I always had. No confrontation. No complaint. No rumors. Just work. Over the next 6 weeks I noticed small changes. Meetings about operational strategy happened without me. Emails that once included my name arrived with someone else copied instead. Consultants toured manufacturing plants accompanied by Daniel rather than by me. When I offered recommendations, they were acknowledged politely. Then ignored. At first I wondered whether I was imagining it. Human beings are remarkably good at creating stories from incomplete information. So I tested my assumptions. I documented everything. Meeting invitations. Decision timelines. Budget revisions. Requests that bypassed established procedures. The evidence accumulated slowly. Like drops filling a bucket. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to suggest that my influence was quietly shrinking. One evening Clea stopped outside my office. "You still here?" "It's only 7:15. She smiled. "That's your definition of early." She stepped inside. "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Go ahead." "If tomorrow someone offered you enough money to retire." "I'd say no." "Why?" "Because I like building things." She nodded thoughtfully. "I figured." Then she asked a question that stayed with me. "Ethan, have you ever considered that some people don't value builders?" "What do they value?" She looked toward the hallway before answering. "Ownership." She walked away before I could ask what she meant. At the time, I assumed she was talking philosophically. Later, I realized she had been speaking literally. The announcement for the annual executive strategy meeting arrived 2 weeks later. Attendance mandatory. More than 400 senior managers would be present. Department heads from every regional office. Investors. External consultants. Members of the advisory committee. It was the largest internal meeting of the year. The ballroom at the Grand Hamilton Hotel had been reserved months in advance. Massive projection screens. Professional lighting. Company banners hanging from the ceiling. Everything designed to project confidence. Daniel loved events like this. He was exceptional on stage. The evening before the meeting, I finalized a 48-page operational performance review. Every figure had been checked 3 times. Every projection supported by data. If acquisition negotiations continued successfully, these numbers would help demonstrate why Harrison Industrial Systems remained one of the strongest manufacturing companies in the country. I placed the binder inside my briefcase. Emily watched me from the dining room. "You've done everything you can." "I know." "Then sleep." I smiled. "You make it sound simple." "It usually is." Before turning off the kitchen light, she said something almost casually. "No matter what happens tomorrow." I looked back. Don't let someone else's opinion become your identity. I wish I could tell you those words immediately changed how I felt. They didn't. Because sometimes wisdom only makes sense after life gives it context. The next morning I arrived at the hotel at 7:05 a.m. The ballroom was already buzzing with conversations. Coffee cups, handshakes, forced smiles, optimistic predictions. I greeted employees from every division. Many had worked with me for years. Some thanked me for helping them earn promotions. Others introduced me to younger managers I had never met. For a little while, everything felt normal. I had no idea that before noon, my career would appear to end in front of every one of them. The ballroom could comfortably seat more than 500 people. Round tables stretched from the stage to the back wall, each marked with department names and regional offices. 3 enormous projection screens displayed the Harrison Industrial Systems logo, while soft instrumental music played through the speakers. Employees laughed. Managers exchanged business cards. Consultants introduced themselves to directors they had only met through email. From the outside, it looked like a celebration. In reality, everyone was waiting for answers. The acquisition rumors had become impossible to ignore. People wanted certainty. Even bad news feels easier than endless uncertainty. I took my seat at the front with the executive team. Daniel was standing backstage, speaking with the event coordinator. Michael Reeves was rehearsing his opening remarks. Claire Donovan quietly reviewed financial notes without looking up. At exactly 8:30 a.m. the lights dimmed. The room fell silent. Daniel walked confidently onto the stage. He smiled the way experienced executives smile when they know every camera is pointed toward them. "Good morning, everyone." The audience applauded. He spent nearly 40 minutes reviewing the company's accomplishments. Record production numbers. The highest customer satisfaction score in company history. 21 consecutive profitable quarters. Expansion into 2 new markets. Each achievement appeared on giant screens behind him. I recognized almost every graph. Many had come directly from reports my team had prepared. That didn't bother me. Those numbers belonged to the company. Not to me. Daniel eventually paused and looked across the audience. "I'd like to thank our leadership team." The cameras shifted toward the executive table. One by one, he introduced each vice president. Marketing, finance, sales, human resources. Each person stood as applause filled the ballroom. Then he reached my name. Ethan Caldwell. I stood. A few hundred people clapped politely. Daniel smiled. This is actually a good opportunity to discuss something important. His tone changed. It was subtle, but I felt it immediately. He walked away from the podium and stood closer to the edge of the stage. Our company is entering a new era. Everyone listened carefully. Growth requires difficult decisions. The ballroom became perfectly quiet. Daniel looked directly at me. Ethan. His voice echoed through the speakers. I appreciate your years of service. My stomach tightened. But leadership also means recognizing when fresh perspectives are necessary. A few confused faces appeared around the room. I remained standing, still unsure where this was going. Daniel folded his hands. Effective immediately. He paused just long enough. Your employment with Harrison Industrial Systems has been terminated. The words landed with unbelievable calm. Almost gentle. Yet they hit harder than anyone shouting ever could. For a second, I honestly wondered whether I had misunderstood him. Hundreds of people stared toward my table. Some looked shocked. Others looked down. No one spoke. Daniel continued. This decision wasn't personal. He smiled politely. Our company appreciates Ethan's contributions. Then came the sentence I will never forget. But no individual is bigger than the organization. He took another step forward. Every position is replaceable. He glanced around the ballroom. No matter how experienced someone believes they are. A nervous laugh came from somewhere near the middle rows. Daniel continued. The strongest companies succeed because of systems. He looked directly into my eyes. Not because of one person. Then he added quietly. And frankly, Ethan had begun believing otherwise. That wasn't true. Not even close. But in moments like that, truth rarely gets a microphone. I heard someone begin clapping. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, much of the ballroom joined in. Not because they were celebrating my humiliation. Because people naturally follow the emotional direction set by authority. If the CEO applauds, others assume they should too. That realization hurt even more. I slowly reached for my briefcase. No anger. No speech. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. As I stood, I noticed Lisa near the back of the ballroom. She looked horrified. Claire didn't clap. She remained perfectly still. Michael lowered his eyes. Several managers looked as though they wanted to say something. None of them did. Fear has a remarkable way of convincing decent people to remain seated. I placed my notebook inside my briefcase. Picked up the small cardboard box an assistant quietly handed me. Someone from Human Resources approached. I'm sorry. She couldn't have been older than 28. Her hands were shaking. It's company procedure. I nodded. I understand. You can leave through the side entrance if you'd prefer. I looked toward the main aisle. Nearly 500 people. Watching. Waiting. I smiled gently. No, I'll use the front. She blinked. Are you sure? Very. So I began walking. One step. Then another. The applause gradually faded. Not because anyone asked them to stop. Because silence became uncomfortable. As I passed different tables, I recognized faces from nearly every stage of my career. Managers I had promoted. Engineers I had mentored. Supervisors whose children I'd written college recommendation letters for. Many couldn't meet my eyes. A few quietly nodded. One older plant manager stood up as I passed. He extended his hand. Thank you. Only 2 words. Nothing more. I shook his hand. Then continued walking. Outside the ballroom doors, the noise disappeared almost instantly. The hallway felt strangely peaceful. The same hotel. The same building. Completely different world. I pressed the elevator button. While waiting, I heard footsteps behind me. Claire. She stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she said, "I argued against it. I know. I'm sorry." I looked at the elevator doors. "It's not your fault." She hesitated. "There are things I can't explain today." I turned toward her. "What does that mean?" She looked as though she wanted to answer. Instead, she quietly said, "Just don't disappear." The elevator arrived. Before the doors closed, she added one final sentence. "You'll understand tomorrow." Tomorrow. I didn't know what she meant. But something in her voice made me believe she wasn't offering false comfort. She sounded certain. The drive home lasted 47 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't answer my phone. It rang 11 times. Friends, managers, unknown numbers. I let every call go to voicemail. When I pulled into the driveway, Emily was already standing on the front porch. She hadn't expected me until evening. The moment she saw the cardboard box, she understood. She didn't ask questions. She simply walked down the steps and hugged me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "They fired you." "Yes, publicly." I nodded. She closed her eyes. "I'm so sorry." Inside the house, I placed the cardboard box on the dining table. It looked almost ridiculous. 11 years. Reduced to a family photograph. A coffee mug. 3 notebooks. A nameplate. 2 pens. And a small wooden plaque from my first promotion. Emily made tea. We sat quietly in the kitchen. After nearly 20 minutes, she finally asked, "What hurts the most?" I thought carefully before answering. "Not losing the job." She waited. "I can find another job." "Then what?" The applause. My voice cracked for the first time all day. I spent 11 years trying to help those people succeed. Emily reached across the table and held my hand. "Most of them weren't applauding you." "I know. They were applauding the person they believed had power." She squeezed my hand gently. "Those are different things." Late that evening, after Emily went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room. For the first time in years, I opened the old wooden box my father had given me shortly before he passed away. Inside was a faded photograph of him repairing that broken washing machine. On the back, written in blue ink, were the words he had once told me as a child. "Machines break. People disappoint. Character remains." I smiled through tired eyes. Then I placed the photograph back inside the box. At exactly 10:18 p.m. my phone vibrated once more. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a single text message from a number I didn't recognize. It contained only 7 words. "Be at headquarters tomorrow, 8:30, trust me." I stared at the message for almost a full minute. No name. No explanation. Just 7 words. "Be at headquarters tomorrow, 8:30, trust me." Normally, I would have ignored a message like that. After being publicly removed from a company I had dedicated 11 years to, I had every reason to protect my peace. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the certainty behind those words. Or maybe it was because deep down, I knew Claire Donovan was the only person inside Harrison Industrial Systems who would send a message like that. She was careful. She measured every word. She didn't create unnecessary drama. If she said, "Trust me," there was a reason. I replied with one word. Okay. Then I placed my phone on the table. I expected anger. I expected regret. I expected to spend the night replaying every moment from the ballroom. But strangely, I slept. Not peacefully. Not completely. But enough. The next morning I woke up at 5:42 a.m. The same time I had woken up for years before traveling to factories. My body didn't know I had been fired. My habits didn't know. My discipline didn't know. Only my mind knew. And my mind was tired. I made coffee, sat near the window, watched the sunrise slowly cover the backyard. For 11 years, my mornings belonged to Harrison Industrial Systems. Emails, reports, calls, emergencies, decisions. That morning, the silence felt unfamiliar, but not empty. At 7:45 a.m., I put on the same navy suit I had worn to the meeting. Not because I wanted to prove anything, because I refused to let someone else's decision determine how I carried myself. When I arrived at headquarters, the security guard at the entrance looked surprised. His name was Robert. He had worked the front desk for 7 years. Ethan. I smiled. Morning, Robert. He looked uncomfortable. I heard about yesterday. I nodded. Yeah. He looked down. That's messed up. I appreciated his honesty, but I didn't want him risking his job by defending me. So how's your daughter doing? His expression changed. You remember. She started college last fall, right? He smiled. Second semester. Engineering. Mechanical engineering. I smiled. Good choice. He laughed softly. She still talks about the internship recommendation you gave her. I paused. I barely remember that. She does. That was the strange thing about life. The moments we forget sometimes become the moments others remember forever. I walked toward the elevator. The same hallway. The same walls. The same photographs of company milestones. Except now, I wasn't an employee walking into work. I was someone who no longer belonged. At least, that was what everyone thought. The elevator opened on the executive floor. The receptionist looked up. Her eyes widened. Ethan. Good morning, Sarah. She glanced toward the conference rooms. I wasn't told you were coming. Neither was I. She didn't know whether to smile or worry. Before she could say anything else, Claire appeared. She was holding a black folder. Thank you for coming. I followed her into a private conference room. The blinds were closed. Coffee sat untouched on the table. 3 people were already inside. Claire, Daniel Mercer, and a man I had never met before. The grey-haired man from the ballroom doorway. He stood when I entered. Ethan Caldwell. He extended his hand. My name is Thomas Whitmore. I shook his hand. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. But I couldn't immediately place it. Claire closed the door. Then she said something that changed the entire meaning of the previous day. Ethan, there are things you were never supposed to know until today. I looked at Daniel. He avoided eye contact. That alone told me something was wrong. Because Daniel Mercer was never uncomfortable. Not during investor meetings. Not during negotiations. Not even during the announcement where he ended my career. But now, he looked nervous. Thomas placed the leather folder on the table. Ethan, before we discuss anything else, I need to ask you a question. Okay. How long did you work for Harrison Industrial Systems? 11 years. How many operational improvements did you personally oversee? I thought for a moment. Approximately 70 major initiatives. Thomas opened the folder. 73. He turned a page. Cost reductions totaling $46.8 million. Another page. Production efficiency improvements across 9 facilities. Another. Employee retention increase from 68% to 91%. He looked up. Do you know what most people don't understand about companies? I stayed silent. They think ownership belongs to the loudest person in the room. He tapped the folder. But ownership belongs to whoever carries the risk. I frowned. I don't understand. Claire looked at me. Then she said quietly, because nobody told you. Told me what? Thomas leaned forward. Harrison Industrial Systems was never as simple as you believed. The room became still. Daniel finally spoke. Ethan. His voice sounded different. Not confident. Not authoritative. Almost apologetic. I should have told you earlier. I looked at him. Tell me what? He took a breath. 6 years ago, before the company expanded internationally, we needed private investment. I nodded slowly. I remember. At that time, the company needed capital. Yes. Thomas opened another document. You invested. I stared at him. What? Claire looked down. Daniel spoke softly. When the company needed restructuring, many executives refused to put personal money into it. He swallowed. You didn't. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because I thought I had misunderstood. I invested in the employee stock purchase program. Thomas shook his head. No. He pushed the document toward me. You invested in a private holding agreement. I looked down. The signature at the bottom was mine. The date was 6 years earlier. The amount. I froze. $5 million. My voice was barely audible. Claire nodded. You put your entire inheritance into the company. I remembered. After my father died, he left me a small manufacturing property that he had owned for 30 years. I sold it. Everyone expected me to buy a bigger house. A luxury car. Something visible. Instead, I invested. Because at the time, Harrison Industrial Systems was struggling. Revenue had dropped. 2 plants were close to shutting down. Employees were afraid. I believed the company could recover. I believed in the people. But I never imagined that decision changed everything. Thomas continued. Your investment agreement gave you a significant ownership position. I looked at Daniel. How significant? Nobody answered immediately. Then Thomas said the words that made the entire room feel unreal. 49%. I stared at him. No. Yes. But Daniel is CEO. Correct. Then how? Thomas opened another document. Because the remaining ownership was divided among investors and executives. He paused. But 6 years ago, when the company recovered, your ownership became the largest individual stake. I shook my head. Why didn't anyone tell me? Daniel looked away. Because the answer was obvious. And painful. They had hidden it. Not illegally. Not technically. But strategically. They had allowed me to think I was just an employee. A valuable employee. A respected employee. But still, an employee. Thomas continued. Yesterday's termination was supposed to remove you from the company before today's board transition. I looked at him. What transition? Claire answered. The acquisition. The word hung in the air. The company was sold last night. I looked between them. Sold to who? Thomas smiled slightly. The investment group I represent. I waited. And he opened the final document. And according to the shareholder agreement, the largest individual owner must approve the final leadership structure after acquisition. My heartbeat increased. I already knew. But I needed to hear it. Thomas looked directly at me. Ethan Caldwell. He slid the document across the table. You are now the majority owner of Harrison Industrial Systems. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The man who had been fired in front of 500 people was sitting in a conference room being told he owned the company. The company that had called him replaceable. The company that had applauded while he walked away. The company that believed his story was over. I looked at the signature page. My names. My ownership percentage. My rights. Everything was real. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Why did Daniel fire me yesterday? Nobody answered immediately. And that silence told me more than words ever could. Daniel finally looked up. For the first time since I had known him, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had run out of explanations. I didn't know the timing would happen this way. I stared at him. What does that mean? He rubbed his hands together. The acquisition team required a leadership review before finalizing the transition. I nodded slowly. And somehow that review resulted in me being publicly humiliated. His expression tightened. Ethan. No. I held up my hand. Answer the question. The room became silent. Daniel looked at the table. The investors wanted changes. Which changes? He didn't answer. Claire did. They wanted certain executives removed because they believed the company had become too dependent on personalities. I almost smiled. The irony was impossible to ignore. Too dependent on personalities. I looked at Claire. Isn't that exactly what Daniel accused me of? She didn't respond. Because she knew. Everyone in that room knew. The accusation had been a reflection of what they themselves were doing. Thomas opened another folder. I think it's important you understand the full timeline. He placed several documents in front of me. The acquisition process began 8 months ago. I looked through the pages. Dates, signatures, financial reports, board communications. 8 months. While I was traveling between factories. While I was reviewing production numbers. While I was helping employees solve problems. A decision about the future of the company had been happening around me. Thomas continued. During negotiations, the board became concerned about leadership decisions. Specifically, he looked at Daniel. Specifically about eliminating key contributors before the transition. I looked back at Daniel. You wanted me gone. Daniel sighed. I thought it would simplify things. The honesty surprised me. Not because it made me forgive him. Because it confirmed something I had sensed for years. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who believed his own importance. And that was sometimes more dangerous. Why, I asked. Why did you think removing me would help? Daniel looked at me. Because investors wanted a cleaner structure. I waited. He continued. And because I believed. He stopped. Go on. He took a breath. I believed your influence had become too strong. There it was. Not anger. Not hatred. Fear. For years, Daniel had praised my results. But somewhere along the way, my independence became threatening. I had built systems, trained people, created leaders. And because of that, the company didn't need me to survive. Ironically, that was the exact thing that made me valuable. Thomas leaned back. Ethan, there's something else. What? The public termination yesterday wasn't approved by the board. I looked confused. What? Daniel made that decision independently. I turned toward him. Is that true? Daniel looked uncomfortable. Yes. Why? He remained quiet. Then he said something I never expected. Because I thought if people saw you leave quietly, they would believe the company could move forward without disruption. I stared at him. You wanted a performance. He didn't deny it. Yes. The word felt heavier than an apology. Because apologies come after damage. They don't prevent it. I looked out the conference room window. 30 floors below, employees were arriving. Starting their day. Unaware that everything had changed. Again. What happens now? Thomas answered. At 9:30 a.m. the board will announce the acquisition. And you will be introduced as the largest shareholder and new executive chairman. I almost laughed. Yesterday at 9:30 a.m. I was walking out with a cardboard box. Today at 9:30 a.m. I was supposed to walk back in as the person with the authority to change everything. Life has strange timing. But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Because victory wasn't the feeling I expected. I expected satisfaction. Anger leaving my body. A sense of revenge. Instead, I felt tired. Deeply tired. Because I wasn't thinking about Daniel. I was thinking about everyone who had watched me leave. The employees. The managers. The people who stayed silent. The people who wanted to speak but didn't. I looked at Claire. Do they know? Know what? That I own this company. She shook her head. No. Why not? Because the board announcement hasn't happened. I nodded. Then I asked something that surprised everyone. Can we change the announcement? Thomas raised an eyebrow. Change it? Yes. Daniel looked confused. You don't want to expose what happened yesterday. I looked at him. That's not the point. Then what is? I thought about my father. The broken washing machine. The old photograph. The words written on the back. Machines break. People disappoint. Character remains. The point is what happens next. Nobody spoke. I continued. I don't want revenge. Daniel looked surprised. After yesterday. Especially after yesterday. Thomas studied me carefully. What do you want? I looked around the room. At the people who held documents explaining my ownership. At the executives who had underestimated me. At the company I had spent 11 years building. I want the truth. Claire nodded slowly. And what truth is that? That no company is built by one person. I looked at Daniel. Not the CEO. Then Claire. Not the CFO. Then myself. Not me. I paused. It's built by thousands of people whose names never appear on the stage. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Thomas smiled. I understand why you became the largest shareholder. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure I understood myself. At 9:20 a.m. we entered the main conference hall. The same ballroom. The same stage. The same place where my career had supposedly ended. The room was already filling. Employees noticed me immediately. Whispers spread. People turned. Some looked confused. Some looked nervous. A few looked afraid. I understood why. Yesterday they watched me leave. Today I was walking back. But I wasn't the same person. Not because I had more power. Because I finally understood where my power had always been. The lights dimmed. The company logo appeared on the screen. Daniel walked onto the stage first. The applause was much quieter than yesterday. He looked across the room. Then he looked at me. Ethan, He stepped aside. An invitation. Not a command. Not a performance. A recognition. I walked onto the stage. 500 people watched. The same 500 people. Different moment. I stood behind the microphone. For several seconds I said nothing. I could have reminded them of yesterday. I could have described every insult, every unfair assumption, every moment of silence. I could have made them uncomfortable. But I didn't. Because sometimes the strongest response is refusing to become the person who hurt you. I looked across the room. Then I said, "My name is Ethan Caldwell." A few people smiled. I worked here for 11 years. I paused. And yesterday I was fired from this company. The room became completely silent. Nobody expected me to say it. Publicly, Maury silence. But today I am standing here because the board has completed the acquisition process. I looked toward the screens. And I have been appointed as majority owner and executive chairman of Harrison Industrial Systems. The reaction was immediate. Shock, whispers, people looking at each other. Some employees covered their mouths. Some simply stared. I continued. But I don't want anyone in this room to misunderstand something. The room quieted again. This is not a story about one person winning and another person losing. I looked at Daniel. Because that is the easiest story to tell. I turned back toward the employees. The harder story is about understanding what actually creates value. I placed my hands on the podium.